I was in the middle of folding laundry when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to pick it up. I said hello and there was a pause, then I heard my dad's voice. Took me a second to believe it was really him. We hadn't spoken in months. Maybe more than that. The silence between us had grown thick, almost permanent. But there he was, sounding strangely soft, almost nervous. He didn't waste much time on small talk. He just said, "We miss you. It's been too long. Come home for the holidays, please." I didn't respond right away. I just sat there with the phone to my ear, trying to process what I was hearing. My dad had never been the emotional type, not even when I was a kid. He was strict, practical, and mostly cold. So this sudden warmth in his voice, it confused me. Before I could say anything, he continued, "Things are different now. Your mom, your sister, they want to see you. We all do. The family's changed. We need you." His voice cracked just slightly on that last part. That's when my chest tightened. Part of me wanted to hang up, protect myself from being hurt again. But another part, the softer part, still wanted to believe him. He kept saying how important it was, how much it would mean if I came. He even joked a little, said he'd try not to argue with me this time. I smiled, but it didn't reach my heart. I remembered all the times I felt invisible at that house. All the years of feeling like an afterthought. But I guess when you grow up craving love, you never stop hoping for it, even if it's from the same people who once broke your heart. I told him I'd think about it. We hung up and I sat in silence for a long time. My apartment was quiet, just the hum of the heater and the ticking of the clock. I looked around at the wrapped gifts I'd bought for my coworkers, the plans I'd made to stay alone for Christmas, and suddenly, it all felt empty. That night I stared at the ceiling in bed, replaying his words. "We need you." That one line kept echoing. Maybe they really did want to make things right. Maybe they finally saw my worth. Or maybe I just wanted them to. The next morning I booked the ticket. It wasn't cheap and it was a 6-hour flight, but something inside me told me I had to go. I packed my bags with clothes, gifts, and just a little bit of hope. Maybe this time things would be different. Maybe this time they'd treat me like I mattered. As the plane took off, I looked out the window and whispered to myself, "Please let this be worth it." As the plane touched down and the wheels skidded across the runway, I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. I was finally here. After all the years, all the silence, here I was walking toward my family. I imagined hugs, maybe even tears. I thought maybe my mom would greet me with open arms, telling me how much she missed me. Maybe my dad would finally say something kind, something that showed he still cared. But as I stepped through the gate and saw my mom standing there, I felt the warmth in my heart instantly freeze. She barely even looked up when she saw me. Her eyes skimmed over me quickly and then she said, without even the faintest hint of emotion, "Thank God you're here. Now take care of your sister's kids, we're heading out." I stood there stunned. For a moment I didn't know how to respond. I had been expecting so much more, but instead I felt like I had just walked into the middle of someone's task list. "You heard her," my sister said from behind my mom. She was leaning casually against the wall, her eyes scanning her phone. She gave me a small fake smile. "Well, at least you're useful for something now." My heart sank. Her words felt like daggers and they weren't even wrapped in a layer of kindness. Just plain, unfiltered venom. I opened my mouth ready to say something but I couldn't. The lump in my throat was too thick. What was there to say? That I hadn't come all this way to be a babysitter? That I was hoping for some semblance of a family reunion? Before I could gather myself, my dad stepped forward. His arms were crossed and his expression was almost bored. Like this was all just routine. "It's not like you had anything better to do with your life anyway," he said, not even looking at me directly. "Go on. Take care of the kids. We won't be long." I felt my chest tighten, the old wounds opening up. I had traveled all this way, packed gifts, spent money, and what did I get in return? Dismissal. A slap to the face disguised as an obligation. I had come here hoping for something, anything, that resembled the family I once knew. But it was like all those years of silence hadn't even mattered. They had moved on without me and now I was just a tool for their convenience. I bit down on my lip, refusing to let my tears fall in front of them. I wanted to scream, to demand that they see me, that they understand the pain I was carrying, but I knew it wouldn't matter. This wasn't the time. So instead I just nodded, my throat tight, and took the kids inside. They didn't even thank me. Not once. I barely had the energy to smile as I guided them through the house. They were loud and unruly just like always. But I could hear their words in my head. Take care of the kids. It was all I was good for. All I had ever been good for. I set them down in the living room, tried to make them feel comfortable, but I couldn't shake the chill that had settled in my bones. There I was, standing in a house that was supposed to be home, surrounded by the same people who had once been my whole world. And yet I felt so alone. No one had bothered to ask how I was. Not one word of greeting or kindness. It was as if I didn't matter at all. I swallowed hard, forcing back the tears that threatened to escape. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. But here I was once again invisible. As I spent more time in the house, I began to notice things I hadn't seen at first. It wasn't just the mess. It was something deeper, something that weighed on my heart with each passing hour. The kids were always hungry. No matter what time it was, they would ask for food, and it seemed like there was never anything prepared for them. They would rummage through the kitchen searching for snacks, but most of the time they ended up settling for junk food. I couldn't help but notice that the cupboards were mostly empty, and the fridge didn't offer much more than a few bottles of soda and some expired leftovers. But it wasn't just the food. The house was a disaster. Toys were scattered everywhere, clothes were piled up in heaps, and there was dust covering the surfaces. It looked like no one had cleaned in weeks. The bathroom had toothpaste smeared on the sink, towels thrown all over the floor, and there was even a dirty dish in the bathtub. It didn't take long to realize that these children were not being taken care of the way they should have been. The kids were also in desperate need of proper clothing. Their shoes were too small, their shirts too tight, and I could see the worn-out patches on their pants. They didn't have proper jackets for the cold weather, and when I asked them if they had warm clothes, they just shrugged and said, "Mom says we'll be fine." It broke my heart to see them like that, knowing they deserved so much more. But what hit me hardest was their lack of routine. They were all over the place. One moment they would be eating, and the next they were running around the house screaming. No bedtime routine, no structure to their days. They would stay up late, sometimes until midnight, playing video games or watching TV, and no one seemed to care. The younger ones would fall asleep on the couch, and the older ones would just leave them there, moving on to the next thing. I tried talking to them about it, but they didn't seem to care. They had grown used to this chaos. It was all they knew. Then one afternoon, as I was cleaning up in the living room, I noticed something unusual on the coffee table. A stack of papers, tucked under a magazine as if someone had tried to hide them. Curiosity got the better of me and I opened them up. My heart sank as I read through the pages. It was a report from the school. Complaints about the kids' behavior, their lack of attention, and the fact that they were often showing up hungry or unkempt. There was even a warning from social services about neglect, suggesting that the children's well-being was in serious jeopardy. I couldn't believe it. How had things gotten this bad? How had my sister and her husband allowed this to happen? I started looking through the rest of the documents, and it was more of the same. The warnings, the missed appointments, the lack of communication from the school. My heart broke for the kids. This wasn't the life they should have been living. They were just children. They deserved to feel safe, cared for, and loved. But instead they were being ignored, neglected, and left to fend for themselves. I realized something in that moment. My sister and her husband weren't interested in having me around for family bonding or holiday cheer. They didn't care about reconnecting or mending old wounds. They only called me because they needed a free nanny. They needed someone to pick up the slack, someone to do the things they were too lazy or too indifferent to do. It wasn't about family at all. It was about using me, manipulating me into filling a role I never agreed to. I couldn't believe it. I was angry, hurt, and heartbroken all at once. I had come here thinking that maybe things could change, that maybe my family could finally see me for who I was. But instead I had walked straight into a trap. They had been pretending, using me as nothing more than a convenient tool for their own selfishness. The truth stung. And it left a bitter taste in my mouth. But I wasn't going to let it slide. I wasn't going to let these kids suffer because their parents couldn't be bothered to do their job. The house was quiet that night. The kids had finally fallen asleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The truth had settled in my chest like a stone. My sister and her husband had no intention of changing. They were never going to be the parents the kids needed. They were never going to be the family I had hoped for. I turned over in bed, my mind racing. I couldn't just sit by and watch these kids suffer. Something had to be done, and if no one else was going to do anything about it, then it had to be me. I didn't care what it took. I was going to make sure they were taken care of, even if it meant doing it in secret. While everyone else slept, I silently made my decision. This wasn't about being a hero. This was about saving those kids, about giving them a chance at a better life, even if that meant going against everything my family expected of me. At 6 a.m., long before anyone else was awake, I quietly slipped out of the room. I grabbed my phone and started searching for child care centers in the area. I needed a place that could take them immediately, a place where they would be safe. After a few minutes, I found one that looked reputable. They were a licensed center with a good track record, and I felt a sense of relief as I dialed the number. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity, but eventually a woman answered. I explained the situation, every detail. I told her about the neglect, about the state of the house, about the warning from social services. She listened carefully, asking questions and making notes. When I finished, she said they could take the kids, but there were rules. Strict rules. They can only be removed by a legal guardian, she said. And you'll have to go through a court process to make that happen. It's a long procedure. It could take a year. A year. That was the minimum. But I didn't care. I wasn't going to let this drag on any longer. These kids needed stability, and that's what I was going to give them, even if I had to fight for it. I hung up and immediately went to wake the kids. I packed their things quickly, making sure they had all the necessities they would need. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The kids were groggy and confused, but I told them they were going to a special place, a place where they would be taken care of and that they'd be safe. I drove them to the center, my heart racing. When we arrived, the staff welcomed us and took the children inside. The woman who had spoken to me on the phone greeted me warmly, but I could see the seriousness in her eyes. She understood exactly what I was doing, and I could feel the weight of the decision. I signed the papers, provided my ID, and officially handed over the care of the children. I was legally protected now. The rules were clear. They couldn't be removed without a legal guardian and a court order. And that was exactly what I was going to do next. I was going to make sure they never went back to that house, not unless it was under the proper circumstances. After I left the center, I returned to the house. I didn't say a word to my sister or anyone else. I just cleaned up the mess that had been left behind. I scrubbed the kitchen, picked up the trash, and tried to make the house at least somewhat livable. There was no point in talking to them now. They had already shown me who they were, and I didn't need to waste any more of my energy on them. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I stayed in the house waiting. Waiting for them to realize what had happened, waiting for them to confront me. I didn't care. I had made my decision, and there was no turning back now. Days passed in a blur of anxious waiting. I had done what I felt was right, but I wasn't prepared for how empty the house would feel when they returned. I hadn't heard from any of them during those days. They were out enjoying themselves, no doubt, oblivious to the fact that I had taken the kids away. When the sound of the front door opening finally echoed through the house, I knew they had come back. I stayed where I was, sitting in the living room, trying my best to look calm, even though my insides were churning. The noise of laughter filled the house as they walked in, all of them holding shopping bags, chatting animatedly about their latest purchases. My sister and her husband were acting as if everything was normal, as if nothing had happened. They didn't even glance my way, their voices loud and carefree. My mother, however, was the first to notice that something was wrong. She turned to me with a raised eyebrow, her smile fading slightly as she scanned the room. "Where are the kids?" she asked, looking around as if expecting them to come running out from one of the rooms. I took a deep breath, trying to remain composed. "They're safe," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "They're being taken care of. Don't worry." My mother blinked, her expression shifting slightly. Then she let out a short laugh, clearly dismissing my words. "Oh, you hired a babysitter, didn't you?" she said, as if that was the most logical explanation. I didn't respond right away. I could feel the tension rising in my chest, but I didn't want to engage with her. There was no point. She wasn't going to understand. None of them would. They had never truly cared about the kids, and now they were pretending like everything was fine. I looked at my mother for a moment, her eyes still wide with confusion, but I didn't say anything further. There was nothing left to say. The kids weren't here and they weren't coming back. It was as simple as that. The silence stretched out between us, but I didn't break it. My mind was already made up. I had done what needed to be done, and now it was time for me to leave. The next morning I packed my bags in silence. The house felt even emptier than it had before, and I knew there was nothing more I could do here. I had tried to make them see reason, but it was clear they wouldn't change. I wasn't about to stay around and continue being the invisible person in their lives, used only when it suited them. I left without saying goodbye. There was no need. They wouldn't miss me, not truly. They had never valued me in the way I had hoped, and I had grown tired of pretending that I was fine with it. As I walked out the door, I turned off my phone. I didn't want to hear from any of them. I didn't want to deal with their confusion or their anger. They had made their choices and I had made mine. It was time to cut the ties for good. The moment I turned off my phone, I felt a strange sense of freedom. It was as if I had finally freed myself from the weight of this family's expectations. I had done the right thing and I didn't need their approval to feel that anymore. I left without looking back. The world outside felt different now, as if I had just taken the first step toward something new, something better. The silence of the empty house stayed with me for a while, but I didn't mind it. It was the kind of silence that was peaceful, the kind that only comes when you've let go of something heavy. And as I walked away, I knew that I had done what was necessary, no matter what they thought or how they reacted. The kids were safe and that was all that mattered. The rest was just noise. A week had passed since I left, and in that time the house had stayed eerily quiet. I didn't hear from anyone, and honestly I hadn't expected to. But then my mom showed up again. She came back to the house to find it completely empty. There were no signs of life, no trace of the kids. Just the silence of an abandoned home. Panicking, she immediately tried calling my sister, but there was no answer. Her number was switched off, just like mine had been when I left. She called the rest of the family, hoping someone would know where I was, but again no one picked up. I could almost feel her desperation from the other side of the phone. After trying everyone she could think of, she did the only thing she knew to do. She booked the same 6-hour flight she had taken before. She was coming for me. I didn't know exactly when she'd arrive, but I wasn't surprised when she showed up at my door, a frantic mess. Tears were streaming down her face, her voice shaky with panic. "Please tell me where the kids are," she cried, as if I had somehow hidden them away. I opened the door calmly, not surprised to see my mom standing there, looking frazzled and exhausted. I motioned for her to come in, letting her step into the quiet, empty house. She looked around, confusion written all over her face, but I didn't say anything. I simply gestured for her to sit down. She sank into a chair, her hands shaking as she looked at me, her eyes wide with desperation. I didn't immediately speak. Instead, I quietly went to the kitchen and poured her a cup of tea, placing it gently in front of her. She didn't even touch it at first. She just stared at me, begging me with her eyes to explain, to tell her what had happened. Finally, after a long moment of silence, I spoke. "You left me alone and invisible," I said quietly. "I did the same with your grandkids. Only this time I made sure they're actually safe." Her eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. I took a deep breath and continued. "They're in licensed childcare now. And because of the center's policy, you won't be able to get them back until a year passes. They're being well taken care of." Her face went pale and she took a shaky breath, her voice cracking. "Why would you do this?" I smiled gently, my heart heavy but resolute. "Because now, you'll finally understand what it felt like to be used, then forgotten. You'll know what it's like to be the one left behind." The silence between us stretched on, her tear-filled eyes locked onto mine, realizing the weight of her words. She breaks down crying, her sobs filling the room, but I don't react. I stand there watching her as the tears fall, feeling nothing but calm. I walk her to the door, my steps measured. When we reach it, I turn to her and say softly, "Take care. You've got a whole year to think about what family means." Without waiting for a response, I close the door. Not in anger but in peace. For the first time in years, I feel like I stood up for myself. Not through shouting but through truth. I had finally found my voice,